Part 2. The alleyway was so narrow that even the sunlight found it hard to enter. The smell of freshly baked flatbread and the intoxicating fumes of the lotus flower hung in the air. Tori guided her new client into the alley. She giggled and pranced in the imitation of a girl she had been when she was younger. Those had been better days for Tori. Days when she had danced before the effigy of Dread Zath. Days when she had believed. Now, like her lipstick, the demeanor she wore was a cosmetic designed to attract male attention. She brought the man down the alley and let him force her against a wall. There he drunkenly fumbled with her robe. He attempted to kiss her neck and missed, his mouth coming to rest on her collarbone. She sighed and pretended that this drunken lout was Gondrus, the boy she had been parted from long ago. As his hands clumsily and roughly groped at her breast, Tori heard a crashing and rending sound. But rather than her robe being ripped open, this sound came from above her. A giant of a man landed on top of the patron she had seduced. Falling from the window above them, he landed in a pile with her client. Now Tori's robe did in fact rip, as her client's grip instinctively tightened. As he fell to the ground, the cheap cloth came apart and revealed her bosom. As she covered herself, Tori let out a short shout of surprise. The giant man sprung to his feet. He pushed Tori against a wall as a heavy clay pot smashed into the cobblestones from the window above. "I will kill you, Cimmerian!" someone above them shouted. "Not unless your aim greatly improves," the giant man called back. Two men leapt from the window to the ground. They each wore leather cuirass and were armed with a small straight sword. One man landed on his toes and assumed an alert middle ward. The other, however, snapped his ankle in the fall and fell to the ground, screaming. The giant man turned to face the threatening one with a smile. "You can run if you like. I shan't hold it against you," the giant teased. With an enraged scream, the man sprung to the attack, only to have his sword blade beaten aside with ease at the giant's deft parry. Then, with a sharp and sudden movement of his skull, the giant's forehead collided with the attacker's nose. The man's hands opened, and he dropped his sword. His palms went to his face, and he fell to his knees. The giant now strode to the other man who had pursued him, and with a quick sweep of his foot rendered the man unconscious. The giant knelt and took the man's coin purse. Then he returned to where he had landed on Pawn Tori's client, and with a quick cutting of the purse strings freed it from the man's belt. His last stop was to kneel by the man whom he had headbutted, and repeat the process. It was only now that the action was over that the large man gave Tori any true notice. She felt his gaze roam up her legs and across her chest before finally meeting her eyes. He winked at her and rose. She was relieved when the violent giant did not molest her and instead began to walk away with all of the men's money. The money! Tori suddenly realized. "Hey, stop!" she called to the giant. "Sorry, girl, I'm a mite busy at the nonce, but I am sure I will see you later upon the streets," the giant replied. He did not even turn to look at her. He dismissively waved his hand in her direction. Anger, brightly burning with indignation, was kindled in Tori's breast. She shouted at the man again. "Don't you walk away from me! You owe me a new robe!" But he would not stop. She followed him out the alley and into the crowded street. The man stood almost half a head's height above the native Zamarins, and he was easily a foot more broad. Tori was about to shout, "Stop! Thief!" But she realized that nearly a quarter of Aranjun's populations were members of the same kinds of shady professions. So instead, she trailed behind him. She was unsure who it was that was pursuing this large man, but Tori realized she could use the threat of them to possibly get her way. "He's here!" she began shouting as she tailed him. "Over here! The thief went this way! We are on the street of Abugar!" This Tori continued for many minutes. She was unable to see the man's face, so she had no way to see his expression. Yet she could sense his frustration at her noisome pursuit. Finally, in the shadow of a foot-stall's awning, the man spun and pinned her against the rough wooden wall of the stall. His angry ice-blue eyes bored into her. "Crom, curse it, woman! What is it you want of me?" he growled. "The drunkard's purse," Tori said. "I earned it. Give it to me." She tried to hold her head as high and commanding as she could. The giant's expression changed. Now the eyes leered at her with appreciation rather than ire. He did not move, yet she felt as if he were nearer to her. He whispered, "If it's coin you want, I could give you a chance to earn it." Tori sighed. Another braggadocio full of his own bedworth. I doubt he even knows what to do, or that he lasts more than a few minutes, she thought to herself silently. And though she was indeed a prostitute, something in the manner of the man irked her pride. So aloud she said, I already earned it. Now give it me, or I will follow you across the entire breadth of the city and make sure that the authorities find you. And what is to stop me from simply planting a knife in your lovely belly rather than something more pleasant? The large man asked her. Amusement was thick in his voice. She flicked her wrist, and the hidden knife she carried arced towards the man's cheek. But quicker than her own wrist, his hand flew and seized hers. His grip was the strongest she had ever felt. Slowly, he was turning her wrist so that the blade of her own knife was facing her. Tori had to act fast. Tori grabbed his sword with a quick dart of her other hand and placed its point against his belly. The giant man's eyebrows rose in surprise. It would seem we have arrived in a delicate part of our negotiations, he quipped. Give me what is mine, Tori insisted. I suggest you do as she says, friend Sumerian, said a man who approached them. He was wearing plain clothing, but his language was stilted with an accent from the south. I could do with some aid, friend Vingian, Conan replied. He knew the voice, and wondered why it was that Indrit was approaching him on the street in disguise. What if I could give you a chance to earn more? And by earning I do not mean in some alley's nook or hovel's flea-ridden bed, the new man said to Tori. You'll take me to some silk-laden seraglio? Please, I am not a fool. Beggars such as you and cut-purses such as he are not bound by their word, Tori countered. Ah, but the men that possess seraglios pay for the uses of men like my friend and I, said the newcomer. And as it happens, I have such a patron. And as it happens, he always has a need for attractive Zomaran girls to aid his schemes he is devising. So, are you willing to meet him and a bounty of coin? Or shall we stab one another in the street? I can't overpower the giant, Tori thought to herself. And if I strike, he might have the life left in him to strike me down. The stranger's offer might be nothing more than a ploy to avoid me skewering his friend. However, all right. You unhand my wrist, Sumerian, and I'll hand you back your sword, Tori offered. No. You unhand my sword, and I'll let go of your wrist, Conan countered. Each of them growled, not willing to trust the other as yet. It was the stranger who provided the answer to their dilemma. He approached a balding and pot-bellied man who owned the stall, in front of which Tori and Conan were having their sharp disagreement. He bought a pitcher of Shiraz. In his other hand, he held 2 clay mugs. He motioned for them to place the weapons they bared upon the ground. Carefully they both stooped and placed the weapons upon the earth, then rose and accepted the mugs. It is always good to drink a health when new partners agree to a pact, the Vingian explained. Now, drink up! Tori and Conan both drank the sharp-tasting wine. She winced a bit at the taste. The foreigner did not. The shopkeeper took the cups back and smiled. The stranger fished a coin out of his pocket and tossed it to the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper caught it by using the mouth of the mugs. He bowed slightly to the 2 people before him to place a gentle pressure upon them to move their argument away from his stall. Even in Aranjun, bloodshed was bad for business. Where is this patron of yours? Tori asked the Vingian. Follow us, and you shall see. But first, let us buy you something to cover up with. Even in Arjun, a woman cannot walk about indecently, the Vingian said. Then he leaned in close to the Sumerian. In a whisper he said, I regret the interruption, but as a matter of life and death, Jadul Rajam calls upon your services. He shall have them, Indrit. For the respectful price, Conan agreed. Tori tried not to gawk at the manor. The twin tigers spoke of the wealth of the man who dwelt inside. Servants bustled about, and in a courtyard men trained in exotic weaponry. Strange birds with long tails that made an annoying noise pranced about the courtyard. The women and men all appeared dark-skinned to Tori. They walked with a pride and purpose that she was not familiar with amongst the servants and the poor. Even the lowest of the servants seemed content with their station. She had never been introduced to the philosophy that had created Varna, caste as Hyborians called them. Hyborian cultures spoke of classes based upon bloodline and profession, but unlike the dogma of Varna, there was no spiritual purpose to being a farmer or a servant. They were brought to the small house off to the side of the man's manor, and at first Tori supposed they were about to use the servants' baths. She was shocked to see a floor of the finest marble and a heated bath being poured for them both. Dainty dishes awaited them on silver trays, and clean water was presented to them in glasses. The women ushered the Cimmerian away from her and behind a screen. She knew nothing of the language they spoke, but she didn't need to understand the words to hear the tone behind them. The Cimmerian had been here before, and had left an impression amongst the women. An older woman tugged at Torre's dress. They stripped her and helped her lather up. She was unused to using soap. Most of the poor baths used vegetable oil to coat the body, then to be scraped off. The smell of the soap tickled her nose. It made her sneeze. The women viciously scrubbed her hair. She sensed that they were disgusted by the condition she had kept it in. She was outraged at first that they should judge her for her poverty. But as they brushed out her hair and perfumed it, Tori realized it was simply to these strange women that the hair was the pride of a woman's possessions. They began braiding her hair and she stopped them. Again, they tried, and she stopped them. A woman who spoke a smattering of Tori's tongue approached, and lifted her hands in a sign of peace. She pointed to her own hair and to that of all the women present. They all wore their hair in a long braid. "Women, young and pretty, old and motherly, all wear hair like this. Only widows wear it loose," she said. Tori felt her heart skip a beat. "Then I can wear mine loose," she informed them. Either out of sympathy or because she was a foreigner, the women relented. They did insist on her wearing their style of clothing, however. The wraparound sash, called a sari, felt strange to wear. Tori felt that she was merely wrapped in a diaphanous cloth rather than actually dressed. They finished by placing a large scarf on her head, which made Tori ask herself why they cared if her hair was braided, or not, since it went unseen under the head covering. From behind the screen, Tori heard sighs and moans that were unmistakable. She could also tell that they were not being faked for the appeasement of a male ego. She was guided outside of the bathhouse. "The man may be a few more minutes. He is very filthy," one of the servants said to her. "No doubt," Tori commented.